If any of you have made a recent New Year's resolution to pick up your brushes again after a long time away, or maybe to learn to paint for the very first time, then this video is for you. We will be painting this beautiful sunset/moonrise painting, and I promise you it's completely beginner friendly. We won't be using any sophisticated brushwork or tricky color mixing. The painting probably looks quite difficult because of the level of detail, but the way we achieve that detail is by building it up in 2 to 3 layers. It's not a one and done. You will need some patience to build up the layers, but you don't need a lot of skill. I'll be teaching you everything you need to know. Welcome to the new year. If you're up for it, then this is what you need. A painting board or canvas. Mine is a wooden board coated with gesso. It measures 30 by 40 centimeters. You'll need acrylic paint, preferably artist grade. Most brands have a student grade and an artist grade range, so go for the artist grade if you can afford it. My color palette is titanium white, pyrrole red, Prussian blue, cobalt blue, yellow ochre, and cadmium yellow light, or lemon yellow. You'll also need some water-based acrylic varnish. It can be a gloss or a satin varnish. You'll need several small palettes or one large one. I like to recycle, so I'm using 4 old ice cream container lids. Of course, we need brushes. I've got this large flat brush, which is 5 centimeters or 2 inches wide, and a selection of smaller brushes. One flat number 12 brush, about 15 millimeters wide. One small flat number 8 brush, which is about half the width of the number 12 brush. A small round number 4 brush with a fairly good point to it. This one is about 3 millimeters wide or 1/8 of an inch. These are all soft synthetic bristle brushes. I think the bristles are made of Taclon. Then I've got one stiff bristle brush, which is a hog hair brush, which I'm using for color mixing. This is a flat number 7 brush, but a number 8 or 10 would be fine too. You don't really need an easel. You can just put a small block or paint tub under your panel to angle it up. Some final things are some paper towel or a clean rag, and I like to use cotton buds to correct mistakes while I'm painting. A couple of very small plastic containers for saving paint will also be useful. Plus, of course, you need a water container. Of course, you'll also need the image that I'm working from. I've uploaded it to my Instagram page at Art Classes Online with Christy. I've applied a grid to the image on my computer where I've divided each side into thirds to make it easier to accurately position all the elements on your canvas. That's also on my Instagram page. I live on the east coast of Australia, so we don't get the sun setting over the water. We get these gorgeous pink skies instead. You'll notice in the painting I've added a rising moon in the sky because of a separate memory I have of watching the moon rise in the same location. So I decided to combine the two images. Plus, I think it adds a really beautiful focal point to the painting. I'll start off by applying a pink background color to the whole panel, mixing titanium white and pyrrole red thoroughly with my hog hair mixing brush until I get the color I want. If you're following along with me, then remember that acrylic paints dry a little bit darker, which can be tricky at first, but you do get used to it. I've added some water to the paint with my brush, and I'm applying it using my biggest brush. Now don't be like me, I actually had to mix up more paint halfway through, so make at least double the amount that I showed you. The first layer has got some mild streakiness in the surface, and I want full flat coverage because I'll leave some small areas of this layer exposed in a few parts of the painting. So I'm applying a thin second coat, for which I've thinned down my paint with more water. If you're using student grade paints, it might be harder to get good coverage, so you may not want to add any water at all to your paints. I'm also painting the edges of my board. And I'm scooping up any paint I have left over with my brush and saving it in an airtight container. If you don't have Pyrrole red in your supply of colours, you can use a mixture of cadmium red medium and alizarin red instead. Here I'm mixing up a pink using the Pyrrole red and white. And here I'm using a mixture of cadmium red and alizarin red instead of the Pyrrole red. The two mixtures turn out looking very similar, proving that Pyrrole red is a very good primary colour. It's almost exactly halfway between cool red and warm red. Moving on now with our painting, I'm drawing my grid onto the board by dividing each of the sides into thirds. I'm using a pale blue pastel pencil, but you can use a white Conti pencil or chalk, anything that rubs off easily with the tip of your finger. Now I'm drawing in the lines for the edges of the water using a slightly darker blue pastel pencil. The horizon line exactly follows the top grid line. And I'm drawing in both the edge of the wave and the bottom edge of the water. The grid should help you a little bit with where to place these two lines. It's worth taking your time and trying to do this fairly accurately because it will ultimately affect the shape of your waves near the front and how much room you have to position your waves within the painting. You may have noticed that I've increased the amount of sky in our painting a little bit compared to in the photo because I want to create slightly better proportions. Plus, it gives us the space to include a moon in our painting, which I think provides a really nice focal point. Let's mix up our first paint color for the water. I'm mixing titanium white and Prussian blue. I've also got some cadmium yellow on my palette, but just ignore that for now. I've put down a lot of white and I'm adding just enough blue to create something close to a mid-tone. The mid-tone is a shade that visually lies halfway between the Prussian blue straight from the tube and white. We want to stay slightly lighter than a mid-tone. I'm adding some clean water to my paint because it's quite thick, but if you're using a flow formula paint or a student grade paint, you may not want to dilute the paint. It's a good idea to practice your brushwork first on a mock-up painting. I've made one up on a piece of watercolor paper. It's a good way of testing your colors and your brushwork before you move on to your actual painting. Now let's do it for real. I'm applying the paint fairly thinly using my number 12 flat brush so that the pink background is still slightly visible through the blue paint. There's some unevenness in the brush mark, and that's perfectly fine because I want to create a sense of texture within the water. I'm now creating more visual texture, laying in horizontal marks using the side of my brush by moving my brush back and forth horizontally, just using the very end of my brush to make the mark with. I'm using the pink background color that I saved to make a correction to my horizon line, just smoothing out a couple of lumps. So let's move on. To the color we just mixed up, I'm adding a tiny bit of cadmium yellow light to create a slightly more aqua version of the color. Just use the smallest amount of yellow because it's very strong. Again, adding some water to thin down the paint. I want this layer to be even a little bit thinner than the last layer. I'm using the front of the brush to make the mark. Turning the brush side on now to create the horizontal marks. And finally, it should look something like this. You might have a bit more pink showing through the blue paint or a bit less. Either way is totally fine. It's all going to work out in the end regardless. I'm scraping up the remains of the blue paint on my palette and saving it for later. It might come in handy. The paint is completely dry now and I'm sketching in the wave shapes onto my background layer using my pale blue pastel pencil. Really take your time with this and do it with some precision because the waves are the main shapes in your painting, so you don't want them to be all out of proportion with each other. I'm roughly measuring where the top of my first wave should be and making adjustments and corrections as I go. Remember that if your drawing is really out of whack, then it's going to make your painting look quite amateur, regardless of how long you spend getting the brush marks right. I know some students really want to rush through the drawing phase in their excitement to get to the painting stage, but just take your time. I'm drawing in the bottom wave to help me work out the placement for the one above it. Then finally sketching in the double wave shape on the left. I'm mixing up my color for the darkest part of the wave, Prussian blue with a little bit of white added. I'm using the same flat brush that I used for the blue background layer. Laying in the paint in diagonal, slightly curved brush marks to imitate the curved shape inside of the wave. Observing the really dark shadows just underneath the white foam caps, using the corner of my brush to create thinner lines of paint. I'm changing the blue I was using to a slightly lighter and greener tint by adding a small amount of white and cadmium yellow. I'm using this as a lighter tone near the bottom of the main wave and forming the remaining waves with it. Now lightening our color further just by adding white and mixing up some more if you need to. Using this as a transition color and laying it along the bottom of the waves to help connect the very dark wave with our much lighter background color. As I'm looking at it now in relation to all the surrounding colors, I feel the dark blue that I used for the waves is slightly too dark. So I'm mixing up a slightly lighter version, Just adding some white to the blue I still have on the palette. The Prussian blue that I have in the tube is very intense. Applying it now near the top of the wave. Now comes the exciting part. Putting in this color is really going to make sense of what we're painting. It's the color for the white caps. I'm using lots of white and very small additions of cobalt blue, Pyrrole red, and Prussian blue, creating a very pale, muted blue. Just a reminder as well to change out your painting water very regularly, especially if you're about to mix up a light color. Sometimes I'll keep 2 jars of water beside me so I don't have to interrupt my painting process. Here we go. I'm using my small number 8 flat brush for this part. One question students have often asked me is, how do I stop my colors from becoming muddy? That's probably the easiest way of keeping your colors clean and bright. The other way is by keeping your color mixtures really simple, just 2 or 3 colors if possible, which is exactly what we're doing here. I'm going back over a second time near the bottom of the white caps, already creating a bit of a highlight there, but we will add more of a highlight later. Once again, I'm not being too regular with my brush mark. Really try to avoid being too perfectionistic in your paint application. What we're going for here is a sense of irregularity and the suggestion of texture to mimic the surface of the white foam. Students have often asked me, how do I avoid just coloring in with my paint? My answer is by really utilizing your brush marks to give a suggestion of the surface texture and whatever effect you're trying to imitate, and finding a way to do that with the minimum possible effort and difficulty. That's what this whole painting exercise is about. It's about using your brushes to their maximum effect.
Guide me there, whispered dreams. Guide me there, whispered dreams. Take me where the gentle streams can soothe my soul. Turn the sky softer blue. Let me find my truth anew. In the hush, 'neath the tree, nature's breath carries me.
We can move on now to the foam patterns on the surface of the water. Using the same color we were just using for our foam caps, I've added a little bit more water to the paint, and using the very corner of the same small flat brush, I'm drawing in small zigzag patterns and blobs of foam. I'm doing my best to create a variety of marks. If my marks are all the same or very similar, then my painting will end up looking stylized and less naturalistic. For any areas that I want to strengthen, I trace the same mark a second time. We're moving back into the distance now, which means that our marks have to change a little bit to suit. Our perspective has changed, and rather than looking across and down onto the water as we did near the front, we're looking mostly across the surface of the water in this section. My marks are becoming more horizontal and slightly less blob-like, and my zigzag lines are slightly more squashed horizontally. The change is very subtle though. For this furthest section, I'm only using horizontal marks. Now let's put some foam onto the thin veil of water at the very front. Our perspective is one of looking across, but also down onto the surface. This is the area closest to us, so our marks can be a bit bigger than for the section of water just behind it. Our blobs and our zigzags can all be a little bit bigger and more distinct. I'm also adding a small band of foam along the front edge, just to define this area. I'm adding a few more details at this point. I'm using the same pink that we used for the background color, which I saved in a small container. If you don't have any left, then you'll need to mix up some more, just using white and Purell red, and testing it on the edge of your painting, waiting till it dries completely to see if it matches. Better still if you can test it on the side edge of your painting. I want a slightly lighter shade of this color, so I'm adding a small amount of white to it. I'm just adding a few more pink reflections on the surface of the water in this section that I can see in the image. The end of your finger is honestly the easiest way of slightly blending the brush mark into the background. I'm also using the blue that I saved before. This was the first paint color we applied to our painting. I'm adding a little bit of white and some cadmium yellow to make the color a bit more aqua. In the US, I think you call that aqua. We call it aqua. Then adding a little bit of water to my paint. I'm using my number 4 round pointed brush to create the illusion of the foam trails within the waves, using just the tip of the brush to create fairly fine lines.
Seeking signs within the night. On this path, steady pace, quiet noise, life's embrace. All the strife fades away in every dusk and each new day. Lead me through this story's page, just a soul upon the stage, chasing stars across the sky, with open roads where freedom flies. Paint my journey in colors bold, in whispered stories yet untold. With every beat, the canvas grows in the symphony, the river flows.
Not going overboard with the foam trails. It's easy to do too much, especially on such a small painting, and then your painting starts to look too busy. Now using the same color to create some shadows and reflections on the veil of water just ahead of our closest wave. I'm adding some Prussian blue to the blue color that I had saved in my container, making it slightly darker. I'm applying a few small brush strokes in this color in this front section of the water, just to create a tiny bit of color variation in this section. This is a tiny detail that isn't strictly necessary, so by all means leave it out if you're happy with this part of your painting and you don't want to change it. The painting is not going to fall apart without it. I'm mixing up a mid-tone to dark blue, just using Prussian blue and white, and diluting the paint with a bit of water. Initially, I'm using my painting mock-up again to practice my brush mark for this part. Using my brush turned on its side to create thin horizontal lines. Then turning my brush on a slight angle to create these broader, slightly curved brush marks. After that, we're going to come back in with some darker brush marks, so we don't want to make this layer too dark to begin with. Practicing until I'm happy that I've got the gist of it. And now for the real thing. I don't know about you, but sometimes I become instantly more tentative as soon as I know I'm doing the real thing. I have to remind myself that we're just playing with paint. It's not that serious. We're just having fun.
Guide me there, whispered dreams. Guide me there, whispered dreams. Take me where the gentle streams can soothe my soul. Turn the sky softer blue. Let me find my truth anew. In the hush, neath the trees, nature's breath carries me of city lights, seeking signs within the night. On this path, stay patient.
And this is how it looks now. I'm darkening up the color with some more Prussian blue. And using my small round pointed brush, I'm adding some darker waves to give the suggestion of chop on the water. I'm applying very small marks towards the top near the horizon line, using the very tip of the brush and almost no pressure on the brush. As I move downwards, I'm pushing down on the brush a little more to create slightly bigger brush marks. My brush marks are mildly curved or angled at slightly different angles to create a naturalistic effect. Again, irregularity is the key. I've got this aqua color here that's already dried on my palette, and I'm going to replicate it using plenty of white, some Prussian blue, and a little cadmium yellow. It was the color I used to paint the foam trails within the waves. I'm mixing it slightly lighter to allow for the darkening effect of the acrylic when it dries. I'm going to place it here just behind these waves. This area currently only contains different shades of blue, so by bringing in some of the aqua color, I'm creating more of a color balance between the top half and the bottom half of the water. I'm applying the color in slightly curved brush strokes to continue that choppy effect within the distant water. Let me show you how I'm doing it. I feel in the end the dark blue marks I just put in are still too regular for my liking, so I'm taking care to create a greater variety of brush marks to increase the sense of irregularity and randomness in this part of the painting. I'm subtly varying the curvature, the size, and the angles of the brush strokes. The higher I move up, the smaller the brush marks get, but I'm only going halfway up with this color, not all the way to the horizon line. Even though it was only a detail, I feel that's really helped this section of the water to look more naturalistic. We're finishing with the water now, and this final step is probably the most exciting one, placing the highlights on the foam caps. Not using pure white straight from the tube because titanium white is a very cold looking white. It's too cold for landscape painting actually. I'm mixing it with a tiny bit of red to tie in with the pink in the sky. I'm going to use both these brushes, starting off with the flat one. I'm creating a variety of different size brush marks, using the face of the brush for the larger marks and using the tip at the corner of the brush to create the smaller marks. I'm also placing the marks at slightly different angles, again going for that random naturalistic effect. Here I'm only using the corner of the brush to create these small dots. Really make the brush work for you and use it to its full potential. Switching over now to the small round brush, I'm adding a few finer details, mainly some tiny dots of foam spray. Again, it's very easy to get carried away here and your painting can start to look quite fussy very quickly, which I want to avoid. So I'm only doing this in a few key areas, really limiting myself. Less is definitely more when it comes to this level of detail. My good people, we are done with the water. In the next video, we'll work on the sky and the sand, and I'll show you how to soften the effects in the water slightly and create a sense of atmosphere. To complete our paintings, we'll be using different skills to the ones we've used so far. There's more to learn, so don't miss out. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. If your painting hasn't turned out as you wanted, maybe leave it for a day or two or a week, then give it another go. Maybe do a full-scale mock-up on some watercolor paper instead. Mock-ups are usually less pressure than a finished painting on canvas or board. See you back here in the next video. Before we go, a quick word about international copyright. Under copyright, you're free to use my photo and copy my work as a study exercise for personal use only, which means you cannot sell, reproduce, or post your painting anywhere. You can, however, use the skills that you learned from this exercise to make your own paintings based on your own photographs. So long as it's recognizably different from my painting, you're free to then sell it or post it.